1996. The year of peak 90s. The O.J. Simpson trial was the talk of the country. John Benet Ramsey was murdered. Her parents totally did it. Princess Diana and Prince Charles split up, and we Americans cared because? The blizzard of 96 rocked the northeastern United States, and this happened at the Democratic National Convention that summer. Kinda missed the politics of the 90s. It was a great year for movies as well. Tom Cruise became the face of Mission Impossible with the first Mission Impossible film. Will Smith started his decade-long box office dominance with Independence Day.
Welcome to Earth.
We also had Twister. I freaking love this opening scene. Best on-screen tornado death in cinema history. Suck it, Man of Steel. Jerry Maguire, The Rock, Matilda, The Nightmare Fuel that is James and the Giant Peach, Happy Gilmore, Jack, Fargo, and even more great movies came out this year alone. And of course, the best movie of the 90s, Dunstan Checks In. Wait, what? No, Space Jam, sorry. It's Space Jam. This was also the year many games were trying to make their transition to the third dimension. Sonic tried with its isometric viewpoints, and Crash switched the formula from side-scrolling to depth-scrolling levels with mixed success. And there was Bubsy. All hail Bubsy. There are many problems and obstacles to overcome when it came to switching to 3D for platformer games. It challenged the very core of basic game design at the time. Shooters made the switch mostly effortlessly by going into the first-person perspective, thanks to games like Doom, Wolfenstein, and Dark Forces that paved the way earlier. But platformers? There were so many problems to solve, caveats to consider. There is no way one could look at the issues, solve all the problems, and establish a brand new baseline from scratch to show not only how platformers, but just about any third-person action game should handle in the third dimension. There is just no way one single game could come up with a solution to almost every single problem the third dimension brought to game design. Oh, they nailed it! First try! Super Mario 64 was a launch title with the Nintendo 64. It's also the reason we have this monstrosity. How do I hold this? The game and console were developed kind of simultaneously. The Super Mario 64 team was actually a little worried about the feasibility of their game being playable on the hardware that was being developed. The game they were designing was running on high-end workhorse computer systems, and there was concern among them that a console costing just a small fraction of their workstation would not have the horsepower to process this new game they were designing. Thankfully, they were wrong once they got their games on final hardware. Super Mario 64 is hailed as a grand masterpiece, expertly designed, meticulous with its level building and movement set. It showed that Nintendo knew what it was doing the entire time. Except, none of that is true. Well, some of it. In reality, Nintendo was out of their element. Everyone was out of their element in this age of game design. 3D, while not brand spanking new, was a wild new frontier. Everyone had time to work and perfect 2D gaming for the past 15 years or so. Going from 2D to 3D in games is equivalent to if movies went from silent black and white pictures to having both sound and color available at the same time. There are so many added variables introduced into creation, it can be extremely overwhelming. The film Becky Sharp was the first colorized movie in 1935, but it's Wizard of Oz that truly showcased what you can do with color. They just threw color everywhere and said, there you go, the road's yellow, the dress is blue, the shoes are red, and midget isn't a bad word yet because we're not sensitive enough to care. The very fact that Super Mario 64 is a masterpiece is an accident. I mean, they perfected the absolute basics for sure, but everything is just kind of thrown against the wall to see what would stick. It's an accidental masterpiece. Allow me to explain. While all this development of both hardware and debut software is happening simultaneously, it wasn't the controller that dictated Super Mario 64's control scheme. Rather, the controller was designed around the mechanics and game designs of Mario. It's the reason we have the analog stick, the Z button, and the 4 C buttons, which would be used to control the camera. And the reason we have 3 handles, because you were to grip it one way for 3D games and another way for 2D games, I guess. But no developer used a controller in this way, at least not that I know of. Anyway, Super Mario 64's influence had moved beyond only influencing Nintendo's hardware and design philosophy. The effects of its success, commercially, critically, and technologically, would reverberate across the entire industry. Sony's PlayStation launched a full year before the Nintendo 64, 2 years earlier in Japan. Its addition to controller layouts was a secondary set of shoulder buttons, but everything else was spot on to what Nintendo designed first with the Super Nintendo. Super Mario 64, being a 3D game, needed a radically different control scheme, which required a radical new way to control the player's input direction. Out with a D-pad, in with the joystick. Within a year of the Nintendo 64's release, PlayStation followed suit with the release of their dual analog controller in 1997. Not just one joystick, but 2. But it wouldn't be until 1998 that a game came out requiring the use of both analog sticks, and it wouldn't be until 1999 that a game used a second analog stick to control the camera. Yet, Nintendo did it first, 3 years earlier with the C buttons, and GoldenEye would use a dual-stick shooter control scheme in 1997 if you plugged in a second Nintendo 64 controller into the second player port. They did dual-stick first-person control scheme 4 years before Halo did with the Xbox. Nintendo did it first. Again. Super Mario Bros. Revolutionized the video game medium in 1985. And just a little over 10 years later, Nintendo revolutionized the medium again, using the same franchise. They took the problems that were befalling all developers at the time and threw everything out the window that they knew. What worked in 2D wasn't going to work in 3D. And they knew they were going to have to get this right. In order to do that, they had to strip Mario back down to the basics and figure out how to get one thing right all over again. Before they really began development on the game, or even really started a design doc, Miyamoto and his team wanted to make sure they got one thing right first: how Mario moved. It had to be intuitive, it had to feel natural, it had to feel good. The act of running and jumping had to be fun in and of itself. But before, Mario could only move along 2 axes, the X and the Y. Now he's given a third axis to move on, the Z axis, and he can move simultaneously between all 3 axes at any given time. To perfect this new range of movement possibilities, they put Mario in an open space with Lego-type blocks to jump on and a bunny to run and catch. They play-tested and refined, play-tested and refined, play-tested and refined. Once it became fun to do that simple task, they knew they had something. I mean, they even put that idea into the game. The final moveset Mario was given in Super Mario 64 was vast and simple. He could run, jump, crouch, crawl, punch, kick in the air, dive, backflip, side flip, wall kick, long jump, double jump, triple jump, somersault. All these things could be chained together, one right after the other. And all this with an analog stick and 3 buttons. It all felt natural. And Mario is at his best in this game when his momentum is unimpeded. And this doesn't mean speed. He's not going fast, and it's not about going fast. It's the movement itself feeling fluid and controllable. His dives don't even slow him down. You can dive for that extra distance, and to keep the momentum, you press the jump button again to flip right out of the dive back up to a full run. For a small flat plumber, he's surprisingly agile and acrobatic. And when he gets going, chaining together these movesets to climb obstacles, defeat enemies, and run to the goal.
Baby, you got a stew going.
Yes, that's fine.
Instead of the momentum serving the jump serves the momentum. This makes the game work. It's no longer about precise platforming, but about using your momentum to overcome obstacles. If it was about the former, it wouldn't have worked. Mario and his environments this time are in 3D space, being displayed and interpreted on a 2D medium. This can make depth perception a little hard. No longer can jumps be pixel perfect. They're all approximations. By making the fun of movement revolve around Mario's momentum, not precise jumping and platforming, the player is less frustrated by missed jumps. A lot of the obstacles even revolve around Mario's momentum. This also makes the gameplay feel more natural, even if it's not entirely realistic. The dev team spent months working on this. More than that, really. Half of the 3-year development time was spent on this and this alone. It wasn't until they were confident that simply running and jumping with Mario was fun in and of itself did they begin to plan the design of the game. The design doc wasn't developed until after his movement was perfected. Everything from here is based on this moveset. The problem though is this left very little time for much else, like level design and actually making the game. Originally, Nintendo had ambitious plans for Super Mario 64. They wanted to design 30 to 40 levels and use flagpoles at the end of each course. Essentially, they wanted to create Super Mario 3D Land 20 years earlier, but they ran out of time. And they were extremely limited by Nintendo's choice to stick with cartridges, so internal storage space was a problem as well. Only so many courses could fit into the cartridge. The team could only get 15 main courses designed, with a few smaller secret areas and the 3 Bowser courses as well, far short of their goal. The constriction became the necessity of their creativity. Thus, instead of 1 goal for each level, there were 6, and a bonus 7th for each of the 15 main courses if you collected 100 coins. Instead of obstacle courses to complete, they became playgrounds to search and discover. And even then, the courses weren't really meticulously designed either. Translations from Japanese Super Mario 64 guides had interviews with Miyamoto and his development team. It's interesting how Miyamoto describes the design process of the courses. He says, "In the Mario games up to now, we've carefully crafted every stage and level down to the individual pixel. For Super Mario 64, there would only be some concept art sketches and brief notes/memos. For example, I'd talk with course director Yuichi Yamada about an idea for a level, then he'd make some quick sketches of it. Yamada isn't an artist, and he draws weird stuff. Then we'd look over those and talk more. Oh, there should be a snowman here. And those key elements of the level would be written down. Yamada and the other level designers then would refer back to these notes while designing the levels with our software development tools." So they did this on the fly, with basic rudimentary ideas, developed from there, and came out with a masterpiece. Super Mario 64 is an accident. I want to clarify something here. Super Mario 64 is an excellent game, one of my personal favorites. And it was developed by smart, capable, and talented designers. To say that they stumbled upon making this creation accidentally is a misnomer, and I'll be honest, probably a bit insulting. While creating for the 3D medium had the team out of their comfort zones, they knew perfectly well how to implement the element of fun and joy into their games. While the techniques of side-scrolling 2D games couldn't exactly be replicated here, the spirit and feel could. By hobgobbling together this mess of a masterpiece with a lack of focus and direction, the team was able to change on the fly to fit the overall spirit of what makes Mario, Mario. Not every idea in the game is perfect by any means, but by freeing up the constrictions of stringent planning because of the limitation of time was against them, it enabled the team to design around 2 strengths of Mario. The first being exploration. Super Mario World leaned hard into that idea, while still maintaining linearity. Mario 64 completely abandons that, mainly because it had to. Instead of courses being get from A to B, they became wide open spaces for Mario to jump and flip and explore in. It was no longer about finishing the level by getting to the goal, but about finding the goal. This is why they introduced stars. Each level had 6 of them, including that 7th 100 star coin. And each star had a theme. Sometimes, depending on what star you selected, affected what was and wasn't in the level. And you didn't have to get the exact star you selected to get. Just about every star is available to get, save for stars that are contingent on certain bosses, obstacles, or NPCs being available. Exploration went from being a large side focus to the main focus for Mario. It didn't matter now if levels are perfectly and meticulously designed, they just had to be interesting and fun to explore. And for the most part, they were. You had mountains to climb, slides to go down, caves to swim in. You went into sunken ships, lured eels out of their den, murdered baby penguins.
What?
The joy now came from looking at the title given to a star and exploring the course to find where that star could be, or what objective you had to complete to be given a star. All of this being an absolute joy. As you progressed, new ideas were introduced that made levels multi-dimensional. Pun intended. My favorite, and I am surprised to be saying this, is Wet Dry World, a water level. I mean, I will get into how even in 3D, water levels really don't work, and they arguably made underwater type levels worse with Mario's movement, but whatever. What I liked about Wet Dry World was that it changed as you progressed through it, or changed based on how you entered it. If you entered at the bottom of the painting, the water level was at its lowest. You'd have to raise the water level based off which star you were trying to find. You'd have to jump and find these diamonds, or swim down to find a diamond, to touch it and raise or lower the water level. Some platforms would then begin to float, changing the layout as you raised or lowered the water. There's even a section of the map you can only get to if the water level is at its highest, and the only way to get the water at its highest is to enter the level at the top of the painting. It's interesting and dynamic. Exploration seen to its utmost degree in the game. There is also Big Small Island. Depending on which painting you enter, either makes you a giant or a teeny little ant, which affects which parts of the island you have access to. And Tick-Tock Clock is a working clock. The hands are constantly moving. If you enter while the minute hand is at near the 12 o'clock, everything is frozen in place. Enter at the 9 o'clock, it's moving very fast. The main courses are wide open spaces for Mario to explore. The only exceptions are the secret courses and Bowser's courses, which serve to funnel you to Bowser confrontations. The second strength is Mario's momentum. This is the basic building block of the game. Everything is literally built around this first and foremost. Mario is at his best when his momentum is either A, unimpeded, or B, can be used effortlessly to overcome the obstacles presented. Mario 64 shines when a course allows for his momentum to be able to be used to carry him gleefully across the terrain, running to find that next star.
Here we go!
Once again, there are the water levels that actively work against that, but Mario now has a breath meter, which is also a health meter. He can no longer hold his breath indefinitely. So water levels need land, or there can be kind of frustrating Sonic levels trying to find these frustrating air bubbles. Those levels in Sonic stress me out in a way I can't even begin to explain. What becomes interesting about giving Mario a breath and health meter and making them one and the same is that water now becomes a source of life, which can be exploited. But back to the momentum. There are moments outside of water sections that also force Mario to slow down and tread lightly. Sleeping piranha plants, for example. Thin platforms. While these do impede momentum, it doesn't slow it down to a crawl like swimming can. And it's a choice placed on the player how to approach these moments as well. Keep the momentum in the control of the player. Each level is designed to utilize Mario's movements to their fullest. Whether it's a wide open space to jump and run, or a mountain that you need to use different types of jumps to ascend. Even though the levels were slapped together, so to speak, they're at least constructed around a perfected moveset and momentum system. There are moments where they didn't account for every action Mario can take. An example of this is the star in Wet Dry World. You were meant to ride these blocks, but the whole section can be cheesed by bypassing it with a long jump. But this doesn't take away from the totality that is Super Mario 64. How this game came together and seemingly solved so many issues at once plaguing 3D games shows the genius of Nintendo. It is beyond me. They spent so much time focusing on Mario's movement and camera control before even writing down a design doc. They knew the core had to feel right. If it didn't, then the game wouldn't work. They had their priorities straight. And this could have completely backfired on them. This could have been the wrong call. So many calls could have been the wrong calls. And to think that a good chunk of this game's design was done by the seat of their pants is absolutely remarkable. This should have been good job for a first try. There should be a giant asterisk next to the word masterpiece when describing the game, saying it was a masterpiece for its time. While there are plenty of elements that can be described as good for its time, like the camera controls, most of the game still holds up even amongst modern standards. That is amazing. This was uncharted territory. They planned just enough, and experimented and flew by the seat of their pants just enough to make it all work and come together just about perfectly. It keeps the spirit of Mario, while also redefining what a Mario game is in a 3D medium. While future and current Mario titles have fixed most, if not all, the technical and mechanical issues that plagued this first outing, it still has no business of being as good as it is. This masterpiece of a game shouldn't exist. It should not still be lauded as a masterpiece, yet here we are. It still is, and it totally deserves an accolade. Super Mario 64 is an accident.